I found out my best friend had been sleeping with my fiancé for months while I was planning our wedding. So I did something that shocked everyone. My name is Rachel, and I'm about to tell you how the best day of my life turned into the worst betrayal I could ever imagine. 3 weeks before what was supposed to be my dream wedding, I sat in my apartment surrounded by cream envelopes, each one carefully addressed in my own handwriting. "Are you sure about the seating arrangement?" Maya asked, holding up our chart. She'd been my best friend since college, and honestly, I don't know how I would have managed any of this without her. While other friends had drifted away after getting married or moving for work, Maya had always been there. "Put them near the back," I said, addressing another envelope to David's boss. "You know how loud they get after drinks." Maya laughed, that familiar sound that had gotten us through late-night study sessions and heartbreaks. "Remember when your cousin brought that karaoke machine to your birthday? Don't remind me." I sealed another envelope. "At least at the wedding, we'll have actual entertainment." The venue was perfect, a restored Victorian mansion with fairy tale gardens. David had initially wanted something modern, but after seeing my eyes light up during our first visit, he'd agreed immediately. That's what I loved about him. He always put my happiness first. "I still can't believe you're getting married before me," Maya said, genuine happiness in her voice. "Remember planning our dream weddings in our dorm? You wanted Hawaii. I wanted the full princess treatment. And you're getting it." I smiled, thinking about the dress hanging in my closet, layers of silk and lace that made me feel like royalty. Tomorrow was my final fitting, and Maya had promised to come. She'd been to every appointment, every cake tasting, every consultation. Sometimes I joked she was more invested than I was. "Hand me those stamps." As Maya passed them, I noticed her phone buzzing. The screen lit up with a text, but she quickly turned it face down. "Everything okay?" "Just work stuff," she said quickly, something off in her tone. "You know how demanding my boss can be." I nodded, though I couldn't shake the feeling she seemed more distracted lately. But we were all stressed with the wedding approaching. David had been working longer hours, claiming his company was going through a busy period. "I can't wait for this to be over," I admitted, sealing the last invitation. "Don't get wrong, I'm excited to marry David, but this planning is exhausting. It'll be worth it," Maya said softly. "You two are perfect together." Something in her voice, a wistfulness I'd never heard before. When I looked up, she was staring out the window with an expression I couldn't read. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem different lately." She turned back with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, just tired. Planning a wedding is hard work, even for the maid of honor." That evening, after Maya left and I'd dropped off invitations, I decided to surprise David with dinner. He'd been working so much lately, and I thought a quiet evening together would be nice. I picked up his favorite Thai food and headed to his apartment. I was reaching for my key when I heard voices inside. David was talking to someone, his voice muffled through the door. I paused, key halfway to the lock, when I heard him say something that made my blood run cold. "Can't keep doing this. She's getting suspicious." I pressed my ear closer, heart pounding. A woman's voice responded, but I couldn't make out words. It was familiar, though. Someone I knew. "After the wedding," David said more clearly. "We'll figure it out after the wedding." My hand trembled as I finally inserted the key and opened the door, making noise to announce my arrival. "Honey, I'm here!" I called out, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. David appeared from the living room looking flushed. "Hey, babe, you're early." "I brought dinner." I held up the bags, scanning his face for guilt. "Who were you talking to?" "Just a work call. You know how it is." He kissed my forehead, but something felt different, mechanical, like going through motions. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd been too busy to see. Little things that probably meant nothing, but together they painted a picture I didn't want to acknowledge. David had always been punctual, but lately he'd been coming home later with increasingly creative excuses. Budget meetings that ran long, client dinners, urgent projects that couldn't wait. When I asked for details, he'd give vague responses about corporate stuff and change the subject. Maya was acting strange too. She'd cancel lunch dates last minute, claiming sudden work emergencies or family obligations. When we did spend time together, she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone and responding to texts with secretive smiles. "Who keeps texting you?" I asked during our florist appointment. We were finalizing centerpieces, but she'd been on her phone more than listening. "Oh, just this guy I've been talking to," she said, slipping her phone away. "Nothing serious." "Since when are you dating someone? Why didn't you tell me?" "It's really new." I didn't want to jinx it by talking too early. That should have made me happy. But something felt wrong. Maya had never been secretive about guys. She was the type who'd call after every first date to analyze details. The florist showed us arrangements, and I tried focusing on white roses versus cream peonies. But I kept noticing how Maya seemed to know things about the wedding we'd never discussed. "The cream peonies would look beautiful with the gold accents you chose," she said. I stared at her. "What gold accents?" "Oh, I just assumed. Didn't you and David decide on gold table settings? We talked about it, but I never told you that. We haven't made a final decision." She fumbled for words. "Maybe David mentioned it when I ran into him at the coffee shop last week." "You ran into David? You didn't tell me that." "It was just a quick hello. He was rushing to work." But David went to the coffee shop on 5th Street every morning, and Maya worked across town. What was she doing there? That night, I mentioned the encounter to David casually. "Maya said she saw you at your usual coffee place." "That's funny. I didn't know she went to that area." "Oh yeah, I think she was meeting a client nearby." He didn't look up from his laptop. She just waved hi. But Maya had said they talked. Someone was lying, and I suspected it might be both. The breaking point came during our final cake tasting. I'd been looking forward to it all week. One of the last big decisions we needed to make together. Maya and David both promised they'd be there at 3 sharp. I arrived early, excited to finally settle on our cake. 3 o'clock came and went, then 3:15. At 3:30, I called Maya. "I'm so sorry," she said, traffic in the background. "Something came up at work. I'm stuck in a meeting running way over. Can we reschedule? But David will be here any minute. We need to decide today. Just pick whatever you think is best. I trust your judgment completely." After hanging up, I felt deflated. This was supposed to be fun. Something we'd do together. I was sitting alone at a table covered with cake samples when my phone rang again. "Babe, I'm so sorry," David said before I could speak. "Emergency at work. The Peterson account is falling apart, and I need to handle it personally. Can we do the cake thing another day?" "You've got to be kidding me." I looked at the beautiful samples, each representing hours of the baker's time. Maya already canceled too. This is the 3rd time we've rescheduled. I know. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Just pick whatever you want. You have great taste." The baker gave me a sympathetic smile. "Happens more often than you'd think, dear. Wedding planning can be stressful for everyone." I spent the next hour making decisions alone, trying different flavors and imagining their reactions. The chocolate ganache was rich. David would love it. The lemon cream was light, Maya's favorite kind of dessert. As I left with our final cake order, I realized I'd been making lots of decisions alone lately. David had missed our DJ meeting last week, claiming another work emergency. Maya had skipped my final dress fitting, saying she trusted everything would be perfect. But despite missing appointments, they both seemed to know details about decisions I'd made. David mentioned loving the song list before I'd told him what we'd chosen. Maya complimented my dress alterations before seeing them. It was like they were getting information about our wedding from some other source. The afternoon that changed everything started like any Tuesday. I'd taken a half day off work to handle last-minute wedding errands, picking up rings, confirming catering details, then stopping by David's apartment to surprise him with lunch from his favorite deli. I'd been feeling guilty about how paranoid I'd become. Every innocent interaction seemed suspicious. Every delayed text felt like evidence of conspiracy. Maybe David was right when he said I was just stressed about the wedding. Maybe I was seeing problems that didn't exist. So I decided to do something spontaneous and romantic, like when we first started dating. I picked up turkey club sandwiches and his favorite cookies, planning to surprise him during his lunch break. He'd been working from home that day, needing to focus on a big presentation without office distractions. When I reached his building, I felt that familiar flutter of excitement that came with surprising someone you love. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, balancing lunch bags while fumbling for my key. But as I approached his door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. That was odd. David was obsessive about locking up. Even when home, I pushed it open gently, expecting to find him on a video call, or maybe having stepped into the hallway for a phone call. "David," I called softly, not wanting to interrupt if he was on a work call. No response, but I could hear voices from his bedroom, low, intimate voices that made something cold settle in my stomach. I should have called out again, should have made my presence known. Instead, some instinct made me set the lunch bags down quietly and move toward the voices like I was approaching a dangerous animal. "I can't keep pretending," I heard a woman's voice say, and my heart stopped. I knew that voice better than my own. "Maya, I know, baby. I know." David's voice was softer than I'd heard it in months, filled with tenderness that used to be reserved for me. "Just a few more days and then we can stop pretending." I pressed myself against the wall outside his bedroom. my entire body trembling as I strained to hear every word. "This is killing me," Maya continued, emotion clear in her voice. "Watching her plan this wedding, helping her pick flowers and cake flavors, listening to her talk about how excited she is to spend her life with you. I feel like the worst person in the world." "You're not," David said firmly. "We didn't plan this. It just happened. But she's my best friend. She trusts me completely. And here I am, in love with her fiancé." The words hit me like physical blows. In love with her fiancé. My fiancé. "I've been in love with you since that night at the wine bar 3 months ago," Maya continued. "Remember? When she had to work late and couldn't make dinner, so you asked me to keep you company? We talked for hours about everything except her. 3 months ago. They'd been doing this for 3 months. "I remember," David said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You were wearing that blue dress, the one that brings out your eyes. I couldn't stop staring at you. I thought I was imagining it. The way you looked at me, how our conversation flowed. It felt so natural, so right." It was right. This is right. There was a long pause, and I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from making any sound as nausea rolled through me. "What happens after the wedding?" Maya asked finally. "I can't watch you marry her and then pretend everything's normal. We'll figure it out. Maybe we'll tell her the truth. Maybe we'll wait and then I'll ask for a divorce. I don't know yet, but I know I can't live without you." "A divorce? But you're not even married yet. Why go through with it at all?" "Because calling off a wedding 3 days before would raise too many questions. Her parents have spent a fortune. My whole family is flying in. It's easier to just go through with it and deal with consequences later." The room started spinning. I gripped the wall for support as the full magnitude crashed over me. This wasn't weakness or a mistake they regretted. This was calculated. They were going to let me walk down that aisle, exchange vows with a man who loved someone else, then continue their affair behind my back. I spent the rest of that day in a haze, mechanically going through normal life while my world crumbled. When David called that evening asking about my day, I somehow managed to sound normal, even cheerful. When Maya texted about final wedding preparations, I responded with the same enthusiasm I'd shown for months. But inside, I was dying. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 3 months. Every canceled plan, every secretive glance, every time they'd seemed to know something they shouldn't. The signs had been there. I'd just been too trusting, too busy, too in love to see them. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed proof, real, undeniable evidence of what I'd heard. Because as devastating as it was, part of me still hoped I'd misunderstood. Maybe they were talking about someone else. Maybe it was some elaborate surprise. Maybe my stressed brain had twisted innocent words into something sinister. I called in sick to work and began the most important investigation of my life. First, I checked David's laptop while he showered. He'd always been careless about passwords, using our anniversary date for everything. His email revealed nothing obvious, but his browser history told a different story. Searches for romantic restaurants downtown, weekend getaways near the city, how to tell if you're in love with your best friend's boyfriend. That last search hit me like a punch. Maya had Googled it just 2 weeks ago. I screenshotted everything before closing the laptop, hands shaking as I heard the shower turn off. Next, I went through Maya's social media more carefully than ever before. Her recent posts seemed normal on the surface, but when I looked closer, I noticed things. A photo of her coffee cup at the same cafe where David got his morning coffee, posted at the same time he usually stopped by. A picture of her dinner at a restaurant I recognized as David's favorite, taken on a night he'd claimed to be working late. I made a list of dates and times, cross-referencing them with David's excuses and absences. The pattern was unmistakable. The real breakthrough came when I remembered David's old phone. He'd upgraded 2 months ago but kept the old one in his desk drawer for backup purposes. Men always underestimate how much women remember about their habits. I found it buried under work documents, and miraculously, it still had battery. Even better, he'd never properly cleared his text message history. What I found there destroyed any remaining hope of misunderstanding. Hundreds of messages between David and Maya, going back 3 months exactly. The early ones were innocent enough. Discussions about wedding plans, jokes about my attention to detail, complaints about work stress. But then something shifted. "Thanks for keeping me company tonight. Rachel would have loved that restaurant. I had such a good time. We should do it again soon. I can't stop thinking about our conversation last night." "Me too. I feel like I can tell you things I can't tell anyone else." And then gradually they became more intimate. I know this is wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you. I feel the same way. What's wrong with us? Nothing's wrong. This feels more right than anything has in a long time. I love you. I know I shouldn't say it, but I do. I love you too. God, I've been wanting to say that for weeks. I scrolled through months of declarations of love, plans for secret meetings, discussions about guilt and how they couldn't help themselves. They talked about me too, which was almost worse. She asked about the gold table settings today. I almost forgot we hadn't discussed it with her. Be more careful. She's starting to notice things. Sometimes I feel like we're living in an alternate universe where she's planning a wedding that's never going to happen. Don't think about it that way. We'll figure out how to tell her after everything calms down. The messages continued right up until yesterday. While I was picking out wedding favors, they were texting about missing each other. While I was confirming photographer details, they were planning their next secret meeting. I took photos of everything, tears blurring the screen as I documented the complete destruction of my life. 2 years with David, 8 years of friendship with Maya, all built on lies. That night, something fundamental shifted inside me. The devastation was still there, raw and overwhelming, but it was joined by something else. A cold, calculating fury I'd never felt before. I'd spent my entire life being the understanding one, the accommodating one, the one who kept peace and avoided confrontation. When David wanted to postpone our first vacation because of work, I'd smiled and said we could go another time. When Maya forgot my birthday because of family drama, I'd told her it didn't matter. I'd been so busy being the perfect girlfriend and friend that I'd forgotten I had the right to expect better. Well, no more. I spent hours researching, planning, thinking through every possible angle. If David and Maya wanted to use my wedding as cover for their deception, then my wedding would be exactly where I'd expose them. They wanted to avoid embarrassment? I'd give them embarrassment they'd never recover from. But it had to be perfect. It had to be undeniable. And it had to hurt them as much as they'd hurt me. I started by making a timeline of their affair, cross-referencing text messages with David's work excuses and Maya's mysterious cancellations. The pattern was even more damning when laid out chronologically. They'd been meeting at least twice a week for 2 months, always when they'd told me they were busy with other things. The restaurant where Maya posted that dinner photo, David had claimed to be working late that exact night. The weekend Maya said she was visiting her sick aunt, David had told me he was at a work retreat. Their lies were so elaborate and coordinated that it must have taken real effort to keep stories straight. Next, I gathered the most damaging evidence, screenshots of their love confessions, photos of them together that Maya had clearly tried to keep private, location data showing them at the same places at the same times. I compiled it all into a comprehensive file that told the complete story of their 3-month affair. Then I started thinking about logistics. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon. Maya would be standing right next to me as my maid of honor. David would be at the altar, waiting to promise his life to me while knowing he'd already given his heart to someone else. Perfect. I spent the next day acting completely normal. When David stopped by to discuss last-minute details, I was the picture of a glowing bride-to-be. When Maya called to confirm our spa appointment for Friday morning, I gushed about how excited I was to finally relax before the big day. They had no idea that I was systematically planning their complete and utter destruction. The breakthrough came when I remembered something my cousin who worked in tech had told me about creating shareable photo albums for events. You could upload a collection of photos and send a private link to specific people, and they'd receive a notification to view them. It was perfect for sharing wedding photos with family after the ceremony. Except I wasn't planning to share wedding photos. I created the digital album using a fake email address, uploading every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The text message screenshots, the coordinated lies, the proof of their secret meetings, everything that showed the complete scope of their betrayal. I wrote a simple message to accompany it. The truth about Maya and David's 3-month affair, which they planned to continue after my wedding. Then I prepared the recipient list. Both sets of parents, David's groomsmen, Maya's family, close relatives, and mutual friends. People who deserved to know what kind of people they'd been supporting and celebrating. But I wouldn't send the links until the perfect moment. Friday night, at the rehearsal dinner, I watched David and Maya play their parts perfectly. David gave a touching speech about how lucky he was to have found his soulmate, how he couldn't wait to spend the rest of his life with me. Maya tearfully talked about watching her best friend find true love, how she'd never seen me happier than I was with David. The guests were charmed. Our parents were emotional. Everyone kept commenting on how perfect we were together, how obvious it was that we were meant to be. I smiled and nodded and played the blushing bride, all while thinking about how satisfying it would be to watch their faces when their perfect facade crumbled in front of everyone they cared about. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and bright, like something from a fairy tale. I woke up at 6 a.m. feeling more rested than I had in days, despite barely sleeping. There was something liberating about finally knowing the truth, about having a plan, about taking back control of my own narrative. Maya arrived at my apartment at 8 sharp with coffee and croissants, just like we'd planned. She looked beautiful, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, wearing the lavender dress we'd chosen together months ago. She was the picture of the perfect maid of honor, ready to support her best friend on the most important day of her life. If only she knew. "Today's the day," she said, setting down coffee with hands steadier than mine felt. "How are you feeling?" "Surprisingly calm," I said. And it was true. The anxiety and doubt eating at me for weeks were gone, replaced by crystal clear purpose. "I feel like everything is finally going to work out exactly the way it's supposed to. That's the sign of a bride making the right choice," Maya said, squeezing my hands. "David is such a good man. You two are going to be so happy together." I studied her face as she said it, looking for any crack in her performance, any sign of guilt or hesitation, but she was flawless. If I didn't know better, I would have believed every word. "I keep thinking about how we used to plan our weddings in college," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Do you remember what you used to say you wanted most in a husband?" She was checking her phone, probably for messages from David. "You said you wanted someone who would put you first, no matter what. Someone who would choose you over everyone else, even when it was difficult." She looked up from her phone, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt? Fear? Recognition? "That's still what I want," she said quietly. "I hope you find it someday." "I hope so too." The photographer arrived at 10, followed by my sister and 2 other bridesmaids. My apartment transformed into a whirlwind of activity. Hair curlers and makeup brushes, champagne glasses and nervous laughter. Everyone kept commenting on how radiant I looked, how confident and happy I seemed. "Some brides are basket cases on their wedding day," my sister said as the makeup artist applied my lipstick. "But you look like you're exactly where you're supposed to be." "I am," I said, catching Maya's eye in the mirror. "Everything is happening exactly according to plan." While the others were getting ready, I slipped into my bedroom and made my final preparations. I queued up the digital album I'd created, double-checking that all evidence was properly uploaded and the recipient list was complete. I set up a delayed send for the links. They would go out at exactly 4:15 p.m., 15 minutes into what should have been my wedding ceremony. I also prepared a backup plan. I'd printed some of the most damaging text message screenshots and sealed them in elegant envelopes, labeled with key family members' names. If the digital plan failed, I had physical evidence ready. But I was confident it wouldn't come to that. Technology had gotten me into this mess by revealing their betrayal, and technology would get me out by exposing them to everyone who mattered. "Rachel?" Maya knocked on my bedroom door. "The photographer wants shots of you in your dress before we leave for the church." "Coming," I called back, taking one last look at my phone. Everything was ready. In 6 hours, the truth would finally come out, and David and Maya would face the consequences of their choices. The wedding dress was even more beautiful than I remembered. Layers of ivory silk and delicate lace, with tiny pearls sewn into intricate patterns across the bodice. It had cost a fortune, but looking at myself in the mirror, I felt like it was worth every penny. Not because I was getting married, but because I was about to deliver the performance of my life. "Oh my God," Maya breathed when she saw me. "Rachel, you look absolutely stunning." "David's going to lose his mind when he sees you," added my sister, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The photographer captured it all, Maya helping me with my veil, my mother fastening my grandmother's pearl necklace, all of us laughing as we maneuvered my dress into the car without wrinkling it. The church was packed, every pew filled with people who'd driven hours or flown across the country to celebrate what they believed was the happiest day of my life. Afternoon light streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across white roses and baby's breath lining the aisle. I stood in the back vestibule with my father, listening to gentle conversation murmurs and soft organ notes. Through partially open doors, I could see David at the altar, looking genuinely nervous in his black tuxedo. His best man whispered something, and he managed a shaky smile. Maya was already at the front, having walked down the aisle moments before to take her place as my maid of honor. She looked beautiful and serene, playing her part perfectly right up until the end. "You look radiant, sweetheart," my father said, adjusting his tie nervously. "I can't believe my little girl is getting married." Thanks, Dad. I squeezed his arm, genuinely touched by the emotion in his voice. He didn't deserve what was about to happen, but there was no way to protect him from the fallout. I love you. I love you too. David's a lucky man. The music changed, signaling time for my entrance. The congregation rose to their feet, and I could feel their collective anticipation like a physical force. 150 people turning toward the back, waiting to see the bride in all her glory. I took a deep breath and nodded to the wedding coordinator. The doors opened fully, and suddenly I was walking down the aisle on my father's arm, moving slowly and gracefully, just like we'd practiced at rehearsal. The church was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Every detail was perfect. The flowers, the lighting, the music, the faces of people I loved gazing at me with joy and approval. My mother was crying happy tears in the front row. David's grandmother was smiling and nodding. My college roommate was taking pictures with her phone. This should have been the moment I'd dreamed about since I was a little girl. Instead, it felt like I was walking toward my own execution, or rather, toward David and Maya's. When I reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and placed my hand in David's, the gesture that was supposed to symbolize him entrusting me to the care of the man I loved. If only he knew he was handing me over to someone who'd been lying to me for months. "You look incredible," David whispered. And for a moment, he seemed to forget he was in love with someone else. There was genuine admiration in his eyes, which somehow made everything worse. I smiled at him, the same loving smile I'd been giving him for 2 years. "Thank you." Maya stepped closer, adjusting my train and whispering, "Everything's perfect. You're going to remember this moment forever." She was right about that, just not in the way she meant. The minister began the ceremony with traditional words about love and commitment, about the sacred bond between husband and wife. The irony was almost unbearable. Here we were, surrounded by people celebrating love and fidelity, while the groom and maid of honor were secretly planning to betray everything those words represented. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," the minister continued, "but reverently, discreetly, advisedly, and in the fear of God." I glanced at David, wondering if he felt any shame about what he was doing, but he was looking straight ahead, focused on getting through the ceremony, without revealing anything. When it came time for vows, the minister turned to David first. "David, do you take Rachel to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, till death do you part?" "I do," David said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent church. The lie was so smooth, so convincing, that I almost admired his acting ability. He was promising to forsake all others while planning to continue his relationship with the woman standing 3 feet away. Then it was my turn. The minister smiled at me kindly, completely unaware he was about to witness something unprecedented in his 30 years of performing ceremonies. "Rachel, do you take David to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, till death do you part." I looked out at the congregation, all those expectant faces, all those people who loved me and wanted me to be happy. Then I looked at David, whose expression was starting to show confusion at my hesitation. Finally, I glanced at Maya, who was watching me with growing concern. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and carrying easily through the church's excellent acoustics, "I have something I need to say first." A confused murmur rippled through the congregation. The minister looked puzzled. David's face went pale. Maya whispered urgently, "Rachel, what are you doing?" I turned to face the congregation fully, my wedding dress rustling as I moved. Every eye in the church was fixed on me, waiting to see what the bride could possibly have to say that couldn't wait until after the ceremony. "I want to talk about love," I began, my voice steady and strong. "Real love. The kind that's honest and faithful and true. The kind that doesn't sneak around behind closed doors or lie to the people who trust you most." The murmur grew louder. David's face had gone from pale to ashen. Maya was staring at me with growing horror, finally understanding what was happening. "You see, I discovered something interesting this week," I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent church. "I learned that my fiancé and my maid of honor have been having an affair for the past 3 months. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that packed church. Then, all at once, everyone started talking. Gasps of shock, whispered questions, confused exclamations. "Rachel, what are you doing?" David hissed, grabbing my arm. I pulled away from him and continued speaking to the congregation. "They've been meeting in secret, telling me elaborate lies about work meetings and family emergencies. all so they could be together. They planned to go through with this wedding and continue their affair afterward. That's not, Maya started, but I cut her off. Oh, but it is true. And I have proof. I reached into my bouquet, where I'd hidden my phone, and held it up. At exactly 4:15, which should be right about now, many of you are receiving links to a digital photo album. But instead of wedding pictures, you're going to see screenshots of their text messages, photos of them together, and a complete timeline of their 3-month affair. Phones started buzzing throughout the church as the delayed messages arrived. I watched as people checked their notifications, opened the links, and saw the evidence I'd compiled. The gasps grew louder, and several people stood up to get a better look at their screens. "Oh my God," someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It's all here. The messages, the photos, everything." David's mother stood up from her seat in the front row, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. "David Michael Thompson, how could you do this?" Maya's father was scrolling through his phone with an expression of pure disgust. "Maya Elizabeth, is this true?" "I can explain," Maya started, but her voice was drowned out by the growing chaos. People were standing up, showing their phones to neighbors, pointing at David and Maya with expressions ranging from shock to outrage. The wedding coordinator looked like she was having a panic attack. The photographer was still taking pictures, probably out of professional instinct. "This is insane," David said, his voice cracking. "Rachel, we need to talk about this privately." "Privately?" I laughed, and it came out sharper than intended. "You mean the way you and Maya have been talking privately for 3 months? The way you privately decided to use my wedding as cover for your affair?" "No, David. I'm done with private conversations." I turned back to the congregation, many still staring at their phones in disbelief. "I want everyone here to understand what happened. These two people, who I trusted more than anyone in the world, systematically lied to me for months. They made me complicit in my own humiliation. They were going to let me marry a man who was in love with someone else, then continue their relationship behind my back." "Rachel, please," Maya said, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me," I said, looking directly at her. "Every time you canceled our plans to be with him, every time you helped me plan a wedding you knew was a sham, every time you looked me in the eye and lied to my face." The church had erupted into complete chaos. David's groomsmen were standing around looking uncomfortable and confused. Maya's sister was crying. Both sets of parents were having heated discussions with their respective children. I calmly removed my engagement ring and wedding band, the ones that had cost David 3 months' salary, and placed them on the altar. I won't be needing these anymore. Then I started walking back down the aisle, my wedding dress trailing behind me. The congregation parted like the Red Sea, everyone staring as I made my way toward the exit. Some people were still looking at their phones, others were calling out questions, but I kept walking. As I reached the back of the church, I turned around one last time to look at the scene I was leaving behind. David was standing at the altar looking lost and humiliated, his carefully constructed facade finally shattered. Maya was sobbing into her hands, surrounded by angry family members demanding explanations. The beautiful wedding ceremony had turned into exactly what they deserved, a public reckoning for their choices. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By Sunday morning, less than 24 hours after my wedding that wasn't, the story had spread through our entire social circle like wildfire. Everyone who'd witnessed the scene had called someone who hadn't been there. Everyone who'd received the digital evidence had shared it with friends and family who needed context. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and messages, so I turned it off and checked into a hotel under my maiden name. I needed silence to process what I'd done and what came next. But even in my self-imposed isolation, news filtered through. My sister called the hotel directly to fill me in on the chaos I'd left behind. "David's family is mortified," she told me. "His mother hasn't stopped crying since yesterday. She called Mom to apologize for his behavior and to say that they're cutting him off completely." I felt a stab of guilt about David's mother. She was a kind woman who didn't deserve to be humiliated by her son's choices. But then I reminded myself that I wasn't the one who'd made those choices. "What about his job?" I asked. His boss was at the wedding, saw everything. Apparently, David had been lying about work meetings to cover his affair, and his boss is not happy about being made an unwitting accomplice. There are rumors he might be fired. David's company had a strict policy about integrity and honesty, especially for someone in his position handling client accounts. If they discovered he'd been systematically lying about his whereabouts and using work as an excuse for personal betrayals, his career would be over. And Maya? Her parents are devastated. Her father called her a disgrace to the family name. Her mother packed up all the photos of you two and threw them away. They're talking about not paying for her apartment anymore since they don't trust her judgment. Maya had always been close to her parents, and their financial support had allowed her to live in the trendy downtown apartment she loved. Without it, she'd have to move back home or find roommates, a humbling change for someone who'd prided herself on her independence. Her job situation is even worse, my sister continued. Her boss was also at the wedding, and half her coworkers saw the evidence on their phones. Apparently, she'd been calling in sick and leaving early for months to meet David, and now everyone knows she was lying. Maya worked for a small marketing firm where reputation and trustworthiness were everything. If her colleagues and clients couldn't trust her to be honest about basic things like sick days, how could they trust her with their accounts? The whole thing has become this massive scandal, my sister said. People are taking sides, cutting ties, reevaluating their own relationships. It's like you dropped a bomb in the middle of our social circle. And I had. By choosing to expose David and Maya so publicly, I'd forced everyone who knew us to confront uncomfortable questions about loyalty, honesty, and complicity. Friends who'd covered for them or failed to notice the signs were now questioning their own judgment. Family members who'd supported the relationship were feeling betrayed and foolish. Mom and Dad are worried about you, my sister added gently. They're proud of you for standing up for yourself, but they're concerned about the way you did it. I understood their concern. The Rachel they knew had always been diplomatic, always tried to handle conflicts privately, always avoided making scenes, but that Rachel had also let herself be systematically deceived for months. Tell them I'm okay, I said. Better than okay, actually. For the first time in months, I feel like myself again. Over the next few days, the ripple effects continued to spread. Mutual friends were forced to choose sides, and most chose mine. The evidence I'd compiled was too damning to ignore or rationalize away. David and Maya had betrayed not just me, but everyone who'd supported our relationship and helped plan our wedding. Maya's best friend from work called to apologize for not noticing the signs and to tell me she was ending their friendship. David's college roommate sent a message saying he was embarrassed to have been associated with someone capable of such deception. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. David's ex-girlfriend from college, a woman named Jennifer, who'd always seemed to dislike me for no reason I could understand. I need to tell you something, she said when she called. David cheated on me too, with a close friend of mine. I never said anything because I thought you were different, that maybe he'd changed. But seeing what happened at your wedding, I realized he's exactly the same person he always was. As the week progressed, I started to see the broader impact of my actions. David and Maya weren't just dealing with personal consequences. They'd become a cautionary tale about the dangers of betrayal and deception. 2 weeks after the wedding, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I was going to take that honeymoon trip to Europe, alone. David and I had spent months planning a 2-week tour through Italy, France, and Spain. The flights were paid for, the hotels were booked, and the itinerary was perfect. Why should his betrayal cost me the chance to see the world? Are you sure about this? My mother asked when I told her my plan. Traveling alone so soon after everything? I'm sure, I said, and I was. I've been taking care of everyone else's feelings for weeks. Now I want to take care of mine. The truth was, I needed to get away from the constant reminders of what had happened. Every restaurant in town held memories of David. Every coffee shop reminded me of Maya. I needed distance, perspective, and the chance to remember who I was outside of those relationships. I started a travel blog the day before I left, deciding to document my journey of self-discovery. I called it Finding Me, a Solo Adventure After Betrayal. And my first post was simply, "They broke my heart, but they won't break my spirit. Off to rediscover the world and myself." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, I had hundreds of comments from women sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. Messages poured in from strangers who'd heard about my wedding day confrontation and wanted to express their support. "You're my hero," wrote one woman. "I caught my husband cheating with my sister, but I was too scared to say anything. Watching you stand up for yourself gives me hope that I can find that courage too." Another message read, "I've been in a toxic relationship for 3 years, making excuses for his behavior and believing his lies. Your story made me realize I deserve better. I realized I'd accidentally become a symbol of something bigger than my own situation." Women who'd been betrayed, gaslit, or taken for granted were seeing my story as proof that they didn't have to accept treatment they didn't deserve. The trip itself was transformative in ways I hadn't expected. In Rome, I spent hours wandering through ancient ruins, marveling at civilizations that had risen and fallen long before my problems existed. In the Colosseum, I thought about gladiators who'd faced life-or-death struggles that put my relationship drama into perspective. In Florence, I took an art class and discovered I had a talent for watercolor painting that I'd never explored. For years, I'd been so focused on David's interests and Maya's social calendar that I'd forgotten to pursue my own passions. "You have a natural eye for color and composition," the instructor told me after my first lesson. "Have you ever considered taking this more seriously?" I hadn't, but suddenly the idea seemed appealing. I spent the rest of my time in Florence painting everything that caught my eye. Street musicians, market vendors, the view from my hotel window. Each painting felt like a small act of reclaiming myself. In Paris, I sat in cafes for hours, people watching and writing in the journal I'd started keeping. I wrote about the relief of making decisions without consulting anyone else, about the joy of eating whatever I wanted without worrying if David would approve, about the freedom of following my own schedule without accommodating Maya's plans. "Today, I realized I haven't felt guilty about anything in 3 days," I wrote. "I haven't apologized for taking up space, haven't worried about being too demanding or too emotional. I'm just existing as myself, and it feels revolutionary." The blog posts I wrote from the road struck a chord with readers around the world. I shared photos of my terrible first attempts at watercolor, stories about getting lost in foreign cities and finding unexpected adventures, reflections on learning to enjoy my own company. Self-discovery isn't just about finding new hobbies or visiting new places, I wrote from a cafe in Barcelona. It's about remembering that you're a complete person on your own, not half of a couple waiting to be completed by someone else. The comments and messages continued to pour in. Women started sharing their own solo travel photos, their own stories of leaving toxic relationships, their own journeys toward self-respect and independence. Without meaning to, I'd created a community of people supporting each other through difficult transitions. But the most meaningful moment came during my last night in Spain. I was sitting on a beach in Barcelona, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much I'd changed in just 2 weeks, when my phone rang. 6 months after my European trip, both David and Maya finally reached out, though for very different reasons. David's message came first, through email since I'd blocked his number. The subject line read, "Please read this. I need to explain." I almost deleted it without opening it. But something made me curious about what he could possibly have to say after all this time. The email was long and rambling, full of justifications and self-pity. He'd lost his job just as my sister had predicted. His family had cut him off financially and emotionally. He was living in a studio apartment on the other side of town, working at a car dealership for a fraction of his previous salary. "I know I hurt you," he wrote, "but I never meant for things to go as far as they did. Maya and it was just physical at first. I thought I could control it, keep it separate from what we had. But then I fell in love with her, and I didn't know how to handle it." He went on to explain that Maya had ended their relationship immediately after the wedding, unable to handle the guilt and social fallout. He'd been trying to win her back ever since, but she'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him. "I realize now that what we had was real," he continued. "You were the best thing in my life, and I threw it away for something that was never going to last. I'm not asking for another chance. I know I don't deserve one, but I need you to know that I'm sorry, and that losing you was the biggest mistake I'll ever make." The email ended with a request to meet in person so he could apologize face to face. "I need closure," he wrote, "and maybe you do too." I stared at the email for a long time, trying to figure out how I felt about it. A year ago, this kind of message might have broken my heart all over again. But now, after months of therapy and personal growth, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. David hadn't learned anything from what had happened. He was still making excuses, still treating me like a fallback option, still thinking about what he needed rather than what he'd put me through. The fact that he'd only reached out after Maya rejected him told me everything I needed to know about his motivations. Maya's approach was different. She called my sister and asked her to pass along a message. She wanted to meet for coffee, not to ask for forgiveness, but to take responsibility for what she'd done. When we finally sat across from each other at a quiet cafe downtown, I was struck by how different she looked. The confident, polished woman I'd known for 8 years seemed smaller somehow, more fragile. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't fully hide. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said without preamble. "I don't even expect you to listen to what I have to say, but I needed to try." Unlike David's rambling email, Maya's apology was direct and honest. She didn't make excuses or try to minimize what she'd done. She didn't blame David or claim she'd been manipulated. She took full responsibility for her choices. "I betrayed you in the worst possible way," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I helped you plan a wedding I knew was a lie. I watched you struggle with doubts and convinced you to ignore them because it served my purposes. I stole 3 months of your life by letting you believe in something that wasn't real." She told me about the guilt that had been eating at her since the affair began, how she'd tried to end it multiple times but couldn't resist the intoxication of forbidden love, how she'd convinced herself that what I didn't know wouldn't hurt me, that she could have both the affair and our friendship. "The worst part," she said, tears streaming down her face, "is that I genuinely loved you. You were my best friend, and I chose to destroy that for a man who dropped me the second things got complicated." She was right about that last part. According to my sister's sources, David had indeed abandoned Maya as soon as their relationship became public and costly. When she needed support dealing with the social fallout, he'd made it clear that their affair had been about excitement and secrecy, not about building a real relationship under pressure. "I lost everything," Maya continued. "My job, my apartment, my relationship with my parents, most of my friends. But I deserve to lose it all. What I can't stand is knowing that I hurt you in the process." She slid an envelope across the table. "I wrote you a letter every week for the past 6 months, trying to find the right words to express how sorry I am. I never sent them, but I brought them all here. You don't have to read them, but I wanted you to know how much time I've spent thinking about what I did to you. 2 years after the wedding that never was, I stood in front of another church, this time as a speaker, not a bride. The Women's Empowerment Conference had drawn over 300 attendees, and I was the keynote speaker, sharing my story of betrayal and recovery with women from across the country. 2 years ago, I began, looking out at the sea of faces. I thought my life was over when I discovered my fiancé and best friend were having an affair. I thought their betrayal defined me, that I'd never trust again, never love again, never be whole again. I was wrong about all of that. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. In the front row, I spotted a young woman who looked exactly like I had 2 years ago, devastated, hollow-eyed, wearing the expression of someone whose world had just collapsed. "The worst betrayal of my life became the catalyst for the best version of myself," I continued. "Not because betrayal is good, it's not, but because it forced me to stop settling for less than I deserved and start building a life that reflected my actual worth." After my speech, the young woman from the front row approached me. Her name was Jessica, and her story was heartbreakingly familiar. A fiancé who'd been cheating with her roommate, a wedding planned for next month, a discovery that had shattered everything she thought she knew about love. "I don't know how to do what you did," she said through tears. "I don't know how to be that strong." "You don't have to expose them publicly like I did," I told her. "That was my choice for my situation. But you do have to choose yourself. You have to decide that your dignity and self-respect matter more than avoiding uncomfortable conversations or disappointing people who enabled their behavior." My personal life had flourished too, in ways I never could have imagined. 6 months ago, I'd met Marcus at a coffee shop in Portland while I was there for a speaking engagement. He was a photographer covering the event for a local magazine, and we'd started talking about the transformative power of art after trauma. Marcus was everything David hadn't been: emotionally available, completely honest about his feelings and intentions, supportive of my work rather than threatened by it. He'd been through his own difficult divorce and understood the importance of building trust slowly and intentionally. "I love that you refuse to make yourself smaller for anyone," he told me on our 3rd date. "You take up exactly the amount of space you deserve, and you expect people to treat you accordingly. It's incredibly attractive." We'd been together for 6 months now, and every day felt like evidence that healthy love was possible after betrayal. We communicated openly about our fears and boundaries. We maintained our individual interests and friendships. We supported each other's goals without losing ourselves in the relationship. Most importantly, Marcus had met me after I'd done the work to heal. He fell in love with the strong, confident woman I'd become, not the people-pleasing version of myself that had attracted David. As for David and Maya, their lives had taken very different paths. David never recovered from the professional and social consequences of the affair. After losing his job, he'd struggled to find similar work. Our industry was small, and word of his dishonesty had spread quickly. He'd eventually moved to another state to start over, working in a completely different field for much less money. According to mutual friends, he'd dated sporadically, but never found anything serious. Several women had looked him up online after early dates and discovered the story of our wedding, deciding they didn't want to risk involvement with someone capable of such calculated deception. Maya's journey had been more complex. The initial fallout had been devastating: lost job, damaged family relationships, social ostracism. But unlike David, she'd used the experience as motivation for genuine change. She'd entered therapy immediately after our coffee meeting, working to understand why she'd been capable of betraying someone she genuinely loved. After 18 months of intensive therapy, she'd started volunteering at the crisis center where I spoke regularly. She'd also returned to school to get certified as a professional counselor, planning to dedicate her career to helping women navigate complex relationship dynamics. Last month, I'd received an unexpected piece of mail: a wedding invitation from Maya. She was marrying someone I'd never heard of, a man she'd met in therapy who understood her past and supported her growth. The invitation included a handwritten note: "I know you won't come, and I'm not asking you to, but I wanted you to know that the woman who's getting married next month is someone you would be proud to know. Someone who learned how to choose love over self-interest, honesty over convenience, growth over comfort. I became that woman because you showed me what strength looks like." I didn't go to the wedding, but I was genuinely happy for her. Her journey from betrayal to accountability to healing had been as transformative as my own, just in a different direction. Standing in my garden that evening, watching the sun set over the flowers I'd planted in the home I'd bought with money I'd saved from my book and speaking fees, I marveled at the unexpected shape my life had taken. 2 years ago, I'd thought happiness meant finding someone to complete me. Now I understood that it meant becoming someone I was proud to be, regardless of whether I was alone or in a relationship. It meant using my voice, setting boundaries, refusing to settle for treatment I didn't deserve. The garden was coming along beautifully: roses and lilies and baby's breath, the same flowers that had decorated the church where my old life ended and my real life began. But these flowers were mine, planted by my own hands in soil I'd prepared myself, growing strong because I'd given them exactly what they needed to thrive, just like me.